is Latin for sea. A lunar mare is formed by ancient volcanic eruptions. Also, mares are less reflective than the highlands, or mons. Wouldn't it be nice to know where some of these mares are at on the moon? Well, how about if I use my nicely drawn picture of the moon to help us out? Alright. First mare up is Mare Nubium, which means sea of clouds in English. And that one goes about right there. Alright, the next one is Mare Cognitum, which means sea that has become known. That one goes about right there. The next one up is Mare Insularium, which means sea of islands. And that one is about right there. This one is Mare Imbrium, which means sea of showers. The next one is Mare Serenitatis, which means sea of serenity. There. The next one is Mare Vaporium, which means sea of vapors. Right there. The next one is Mare Tranquillitatis, which means sea of tranquility. Right there. Next one is Mare Crisium, which means sea of crisis. Way at the top right up there. The last one I'm going to do is Mare Nectarius, which means sea of nectar. Right there. Enough with the Marias already. Let's find some highlands on the moon. Let's start with a mountain range called Montes Raphitas, which comes from the Greek name for the Ural Mountains, which is found down in here. Alright, so let's do some individual mountains called Mons. The first Mon I'll talk about is Mons Delisle, which is named after a nearby crater, Delisle. Right there. Alright. Next is Mons Piton, which is named after Mont Piton of Spain. That one is way up there. Alright, next is Mons Agnes, which comes from the Greek feminine name. That guy is right there. Next is Mons Assam, which comes from the Arabic masculine name. And that one is way up there. Last one I'll do is Mons Pennock, which is named after the geographer Albert Pennock. And that one is down there. Humans, being the curious creatures that we are, have always tried to do the impossible. And what could be more adventurous than walking on the moon? But how are we going to get there? I mean, we're not all Superman, we can't just fly to the moon. We also couldn't just use one of our World War II airplanes and fly there either. That's not going to work. Not even a B-52 bomber can make it to the moon. So what could we use? What we needed was a rocket that could get us all the way there. But not just some cheesy alien-like rocket. We needed a NASA rocket. That way we could explore the moon. There were many missions before this, but the first crew to actually orbit the moon was Apollo 8. They launched in December 21st, 1969, and they were up in space for 6 days. This was the first time pictures had been taken by humans from deep space. This was the first live TV coverage of the lunar surface as well. The crew was the first to be launched by the Saturn rocket, and the crew was Frank Borman, James Lowell Jr., and William Anders. Apollo 9, which was launched on March 3rd, 1969, was the first mission to have a flight test of the lunar module in Earth's orbit. They were up in space for 10 days. It was also the first spacewalk test of the new lunar space suit. The command module was called the Gumdrop, and the launch vehicle was called the Spider. The crew was James McDivitt, David Scott, and Russell Skonsgegart. The next mission, Apollo 10, tested the lunar module in lunar orbit. They launched on May 8, 1969, and were up in space for 8 days. The command module was called the Charlie Brown. And the lunar module was called Snoopy. The crew was Stoffard, Young, and Cernan. Let's talk about the most memorable Apollo mission, Apollo 11, which launched in July 16th, 1969, and was the first mission to land on the moon. They were out in space for 8 days. Neil Armstrong was the first man to step onto the moon, and they were on the moon's surface for 22 hours. Apollo 11 landed about right here. They landed in what was called the Sea of Tranquility, which I went over earlier. The command module was called the Columbia, and the crew was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Apollo 12, which launched in November 14th, 1969, was the second manned mission to land on the moon. They landed right there, in what was called Ocean Placerium. The first major experiments on the moon happened during this mission. They also received pieces from the Surveyor spacecraft. The command module was called the Yankee Clipper, and the crew was Charles Conrad Jr., Richard Gordon Jr., and Alan Bean. Apollo 13, which launched on April 11th, 1970, had a major malfunction while in space. There was an explosion in the service module that had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. They didn't land on the moon, but were still able to return to Earth safely. The command module was called the Odyssey, and the crew was James Lowell, John Swigert Jr., and Fred Haise. Apollo 14, which launched in January 31st, 1971, landed about right there, very close to Apollo 12. The crew was Alan Shepard Jr., Stuart Rosa, and Edgar Mitchell. Alan Shepard led this mission and also was the oldest man to walk on the moon. He also got the chance to hit 2 golf balls on the moon. How cool. The command module was called the Kitty Hawk, and the lunar module was called Antares. Apollo 15, which launched in July 26, 1971, was the first mission to use the rover vehicle. They were out in space for 12 days and landed about right there. The crew launched the first SUL satellite into lunar orbit to study the moon. They also landed the farthest away from the lunar equator, the farthest north. A major problem was that one of the 3 landing parachutes failed during the descent to Earth. The command module was called the Endeavour. The lunar module was called the Falcon. The crew was David Scott, Alfred Woodwin, and James Irwin. Apollo 16, which was launched in April 16, 1972, lasted 11 days out in space. Apollo 16 is right there. This mission was set the moon land speed record, because their lunar rover could reach speeds up to 11 miles an hour. They landed in what was called the Descartes Highlands, and the landing site is the highest Apollo landing site. The command module was called the Casper, and the crew was John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke Jr. Apollo 17, which was launched in December 7th, 1972, was the last Apollo mission to the moon. This mission lasted 12.5 days, and they landed up there. Alright, the greatest amounts of lunar samples were retrieved on this mission, and the command module was called the America. The lunar module was called the Challenger. The crew was Edgar Cernan, Ronald Evans, and Jack Schmitt. To date, Cernan is the last human to have walked on the moon, as no humans have visited the moon since December 14th, 1972. There were also planned Apollo 18, 19, and 20, but all had to be canceled due to budget cuts. Well, there you have it. I hope you learn more about the geography of the moon and about the Apollo missions to the moon. Thanks for watching.